Hello, I'm Dave Biebel, Director of Communications for the Christian Medical and Dental Society. And I'd like to welcome you to what I think will be an inspirational and unique experience over the next 90 minutes as you listen in with me on what was undoubtedly one of the highlights of my life, an extended interview with Drs. Paul and Margaret Brand, which we did in June of 1993 near their home in Seattle, Washington. Perhaps you've seen some of Dr. Brand's books, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made and In His Image, which he did with Philip Yancey. Well, they had another book come out in 1993 called Pain, the Gift Nobody Wants. And Dr. Brand published another one in 1993 as well called The Forever Feast. In these works, Dr. Brand draws upon his experience as an orthopedic surgeon working with leprosy patients for 19 years in India and then 22 years at the Hansen's Disease Center in Carville, Louisiana. He was the first surgeon to develop methods to prevent deformity and heal the ulcerations of the foot and hand in leprosy patients. He has received many honors and rewards, including the Albert Lasker Award for Outstanding Leadership and Service in the Rehabilitation of the Handicapped. He's received the Surgeon General's Award, medallion from the Department of Health and Human Services, Public Health Service. He was appointed by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth as Commander of the Order of the British Empire. In 1982, he was honored by the Christian Medical and Dental Society as a Servant of Christ. He was elected president of the International Christian Medical and Dental Association in 1987. Dr. Margaret Brand met her future husband across a chemistry bench when they were both students in London. They married after graduation and left with 2 of their 6 children for the Christian Medical College in Vellore, India in 1946. When she volunteered for part-time service at the medical college, Dr. Margaret Brand was assigned to the ophthalmology department even though she had no experience in ophthalmology. You'll be inspired to see how God used her and continues to use her in this field. Dr. Margaret Brand soon recognized that blindness is a common problem in leprosy, and she became one of the first physicians to make a special study of the causes and prevention of blindness and leprosy. During their 22 years in Carville, Dr. Margaret Brand served as Chief of Ophthalmology. She's authored articles and books on the ocular problems of leprosy and is probably the most experienced and best-known teacher in this field anywhere in the world. For your convenience, and especially if you're using this in a small group with time constraints, we've broken the interview into segments of about 20 minutes apiece. Each of the segments has its own introduction. I'm confident that you will enjoy hearing from Drs. Paul and Margaret Brand as they address such subjects as integrating faith in medicine, putting the joy back in medicine, what is success, the importance of the doctor-patient relationship, and what is a Christian doctor. And then I'm sure you'll be inspired when they talk about the keys to a long-lasting marriage relationship. I wonder if you would share something with us about your background and also how you came to know each other.
Well, that's a broad question. I grew up in India, and Margaret grew up in South Africa. But we met in London, England, at medical school in our freshman year. And I think it was partly because both our names began with a B. She was a Berry and I was a Brand. And they distributed the benches in our chemistry practical laboratory by alphabetical sequence. So there we were opposite each other. We'd never met before. And it was a good introduction, I think.
Of course, we had very different backgrounds. Paul came from a very missionary background, and I came from a very secular background. A lovely family, medical family, but not a Christian family. And so we had some interesting viewpoints as we came together, though by the time we were married, I had become a committed Christian.
Dr. Paul, did you always want to be a physician, or did that go through a transition with you?
Oh, I never wanted to be a physician. No.
And in leprosy patients. He has received many honors and rewards, including the Albert Lasker Award for Outstanding Leadership and Service in the Rehabilitation of the Handicapped. He's received the Surgeon General's Award, medallion from the Department of...
We were just part of their missionary enterprise, but the medical work, we were into everything that my parents were doing, and I watched my father opening enormous abscesses and pus gushing out into a bucket, and of course they had no anesthesia, and I just didn't want any part of that kind of stuff. I thought I'd like to work with healthy people. But it wasn't until, in fact, I wanted to be a missionary long before I wanted to be a doctor. And I think it was the recognition that medical work would be valuable. And also the recognition that I loved it. In our training, in the missionary training that I had, we had to have periods of time studying elements of medicine and tropical hygiene. And it was while we were doing that I caught the disease.
Sometimes when you share with audiences, or when we think about how you grew up in India, the son of missionary parents, we might say, oh, you poor thing, think of all the things you missed. How do you react to that?
I've had people say that to me, and so far I've restrained myself from strangling them. Because it's so far off the mark. You know, it's true we don't have a Mercedes now, which we might otherwise have had, but my life, our life together, has been a real wonderful adventure, and I don't think that there's any way in which we would have had more happiness or more fulfillment with any major change that I could fit into it. I think that it's been a reward. Some people wait to the end of their lives to feel a sense of reward for what they've done, but with us, I think it's been fun all the way through.
Is there something about the simplicity of life in that setting that is preferable?
Yes, indeed. I think there's no question. We grew up in a little home that my father had built with his own hands, we children, and we had no toys except just one manufactured toy I can remember in my early childhood, a little motor car. We had no roads, we had no electricity, we had no plumbing, we had no radio or television, great benefit. And we therefore had to be creative. And I think children who are thrown back on their own initiative to turn the trees and the streams and the stones and the rocks and make them into fun, I think it develops creativity. And I remember my childhood with intense delight.
You just celebrated your 50th wedding anniversary.
Yeah.
And obviously you both have worked together for that, and you share common values and a love that has sustained itself and sustained you over all these years. I'm wondering, in fact, I believe I read that you celebrate your marriage vows each year in some way, and I wish you would share with us some of the keys that you think are important to sustaining a love for a lifetime in the way that you have.
I'm not sure that we celebrate the liturgical vows, but we do try to live them. And I've just been trying to think, what are some of the things that really have, just recently, because we've celebrated this 50th landmark, and other people have asked us. I think the recognition of the fact that we are so fallible, that we can make mistakes, but we can say sorry. We can say, I forgive you. And we can be friends again. Nothing is irreversible when you have that attitude. And somebody said love is never having to say sorry. But I think love is recognizing you say sorry every time. You don't wait. And the sooner it's said, the better. Don't let things build up. That's been an important thing that Paul taught me from the beginning. Let's keep short accounts. And then praying together. I know a lot of Christian couples who never pray together. And I think they're missing a tremendous blessing. Just being together, sharing before the Lord in a very simple way as we talk to the Lord. And sometimes we share things that neither of us had been aware was on the other one's mind. But as we talk to the Lord about it, it becomes clear to us and we can be more sensitive about something. And I think the going through hard times together, we've been through some tough times, and just knowing that we are committed to one another, that's probably the key. The commitment. This isn't an option. Divorce is not an option for us. Our pastor, I think he was quoting somebody else, said, murder, yes, quite often, but divorce, never. He was...
The things that have gone through his mind.
Yes. And his wife, too, would laughingly say, oh, yes. So that you can feel mad with your partner, but it doesn't have to go on. And you can say sorry, and you can come back. If we couldn't, we would never have survived this, but the Lord has given us such a wonderful way to maintain it. And then I think being able to laugh together. We love to share jokes. And I think laughing together is very important, as well as crying together. So we've just learned to share each other's lives. And
the phrase "one flesh," which is used initially, the earliest description in Genesis, when God made men and women, he said, "They shall be one flesh." Now, if you have a problem in one leg, your first thought isn't to cut it off. The other leg limps and takes a bigger load, and you hurt with each other's hurts if you're one flesh. You know, it's often occurred to me that marriage brings you into such intimacy that you really know better than anybody else on earth how to hurt your spouse, you know. I know ways I could hurt Margaret, and she knows ways she could hurt me better than anybody else could. But if you're one flesh, that very thought is repugnant. And but I think that the biggest thing of all is the revolution in the way people regard marriage these days. The number one thing is your satisfaction, your own pleasure. And the number two thing is all the rest. Whereas if one looks upon marriage as the ultimate commitment, that there is no option about it, it's final, as it is, as we are taught in the Word of God, then I think that whatever happens, whatever situation arises, you can find a way around it, because the other is not an option. And I really believe that needs to come back into our Christian teaching, that there is not an option. And that's why it is that in the context of the church you find more golden weddings than you do in the context outside the church.
Dr. Margaret shared spoke of many of the things that you've shared, your joys and your sorrows. You also shared your work, and I'm wondering how large an impact that's had in terms of your the relationship that you've just described.
I'm going to take that first. I'd like to say, because I'm a doctor, I realized that Paul was committed to another job. He was committed to other people, not just to his family. It was a hard thing for me to learn, but when Paul would leave the house before 7 in the morning and not get back till after 10, sometimes I would get a bit grieved about it, but I would realize that this was his job, and he'd been given it, and it was the Lord's work for him, and it wasn't for me to be complaining about it. So I think being a doctor, I understood better what it meant to have the commitment to your patients. Likewise, he understood when I'd be out on an eye camp and not at home with looking after the children. He understood that, so we could understand each other's parts better.
At the same time, Margaret undoubtedly had the family as her number one commitment, even though she was medical and doing a wonderful work in medicine. If one of the children was sick or needed something, she was, because she was basically a volunteer in the Christian Medical College, she was always able to give that her priority. And I think that's important from the point of view of the kids.
Since we were talking about the kids, I think perhaps one of the most common questions you get from people thinking about going into medical missions has to do with raising a family on the mission field. Would you share with us what it was like as you raised a large family on the mission field?
I think a lot of what Paul has already said about his childhood applied to ours to a lesser degree. Our children we had 2 old bicycles in the family, and they went many miles. And the children found a lot of pleasure in simple things, and there was no sophisticated facilities for them to learn to swim. They learned in irrigation wells and other exciting places. And they had a lot of exciting adventures, which they all enjoyed. It was a little harder when it came to school, and we didn't want to send our children away to boarding schools. Some parents sent their children very young to boarding schools. So I homeschooled the first 4 of them until they were about into 5th grade. And then when they reached about the age of 9 to 10, they went off to boarding school. We had the toughest time when our son reached the age where boarding school in India no longer met his needs. And in order to get into the then British system, because we were very British, he would have to go to a school in England. And so we elected to leave him and his sister. He was 14, she was 11, to go to a boarding school, and we would go back to India for a last term. And that was a tough decision, which I shudder thinking now about it. It was very hard, especially on our daughter. Nevertheless, the Lord used it. She learned to rely on Him since we weren't there. And she has become a very, very deeply committed Christian. It was harder, I think, our son had not quite such an easy final outcome, but the Lord undertook for them. But that was the toughest thing to do.
Dr. Margaret, you've been traveling quite a lot as well, and often when you travel you hear from women medical students or women physicians. What are the kind of questions that seem to be on their mind these days?
I think it's always how to juggle their priorities, how to determine their priorities, especially if they know that they're going to get married, they want to have a family. How will they manage to raise a family and yet not drop out of their profession? Recognizing that today, if you drop out even for a year, you just get bypassed. Knowledge is going so fast that just to try and keep up in your own small area is quite a tough undertaking. But I think you have to make your determination of what really, really does count. And if I were to look back and somebody would say, supposing you had to give up either your medical career or your children, if you'd had to come to that point, which one would have gone? And I think I would have dropped my medical career. I think that the children have got such a tremendous place in my life, in my priorities, that, and of course my other responsibility, just being a wife.
Don't say just being a wife.
So I think you do have to make that determination. Then I would say, if you can, get into a specialty which is not going to require you being on call, having to answer emergency calls, so that if you have to be away from the children, they will know mother's going to be away until so-and-so, then she'll be back. Having certainties helps them. They can cope very often. It's the uncertainties. It's the, will she be there when I get home? What happens if she doesn't get back? And those are the things that I think bother children a lot. But they can cope very well. You've got this responsibility, you've got that one. I'll be home, I trust, by so-and-so, and then we'll all get together and we'll do so-and-so together. Children can cope with that. So go into a specialty that, like, just giving you an example, I think dermatology is a good one, ophthalmology is a good one. And to some extent, a limited specialty like anesthesiology Our daughter does that, and she's managing, sharing a job with another young mother, and they know exactly what their demands are going to be in their hours. And I think that helps to maintain it. But to be on call, to be suddenly called away from whatever you're doing, and that becomes your priority, and the children just say, what happens to us now? I don't think that is at all a satisfactory arrangement. So I would put the children first. If you can, go into a quieter, not less demanding, more structured specialty. But if that doesn't work out, then you just put your kids first. At least that's how I would feel.
In this segment of our interview, Doctors Paul and Margaret Brand describe how they got involved in working with leprosy patients. Drawing from their deep well of patient stories, both doctors share how working with these sometimes despised and ostracized patients helped them in their own personal growth, had a major impact in their own lives as they ministered to the least of these. Especially riveting, I'm sure you'll agree, is the story of Sarda Gopan, a leprosy patient who came to them as a stranger and became their lifelong friend. Well, you were in India. In terms of your medical work, you both are thought of as having pioneered in relation to treatment of leprosy. And I'm wondering if you would just tell us something about how you recall that and things that really seem important now as you look back to on that whole period in your life.
Well, this could go on for hours, but I suppose I was the first one to explore the leprosy field, and at the time I had gone to India simply as a surgeon. I hadn't any idea that leprosy would be a major interest in my life, and it just surprised me in the environment that we started to work. It surprised me that there were so many people sitting around the streets and at railway stations and temples that were grossly deformed. Clawed hands, missing digits, ulcerated feet, blind, and I had to ask people what they were, how come, and they just said, "Oh, they're just lepers," as though it almost put them outside the category of people that you're interested in. And it happened that the chief physician of our medical college at that time was one of the world's leading experts on leprosy. And he invited me over one day to visit him in his leprosy institution. And it was there that the thing really came home. He had been giving me long talks on how to diagnose leprosy and the features of the skin. It's thought of as a skin disease. And he was pointing out papules and macules and plaques and pimples and this sort of thing. And I couldn't take too much of that. So I said, "Bob, tell me about these deformities. Why do the hands get this way? Why are the fingers missing altogether?" And he looked at me, he said, "I just don't know." I said, "Bob, you've been 30 years studying leprosy and you don't know." And then he turned on me and he said, "And whose fault is it that I don't know?" He said, "I'm a dermatologist, and I've told you all about the dermatology of leprosy. I've explored it as an internist." And he said, "The orthopedic surgeon here is you. You're the one who should be telling me why these deformities happen." And saying this, he kind of poked me in the stomach. I could still feel that poke. Mm-hmm. And it was a very direct challenge. And I felt, as I began examining that hand of the patient who was standing in front of us, I just felt a tremendous sense that God was speaking to me, not poking me in the stomach, but that God was saying, this is your call. And I really felt that God was saying that I had come to India for this purpose, that the other things, the inducements that I knew about, the challenges that I knew about, were just kind of bait to get me into a situation I knew nothing about. And that this was really God's purpose for me. And I think that's how it's turned out.
Dr. Margaret, you became involved somewhat later.
Yes.
But would you describe how that happened and how it...
Well, perhaps I should go back a year or two earlier, because I had never intended to be an ophthalmologist. I thought when I went to India that my greatest contribution would be in pediatrics. And I did do that for about a year. And then the staffing situation in that department improved, but it was very poor in the eye department. People had to go work in other hospitals. It was a crisis situation. And we had just got our third child. Mary was 2 weeks old when I had a little note, a little request from the director saying, we don't want to hurry you, but we must have somebody else in the eye department. And I replied, I don't mind being hurried, but I don't know anything about eyes. You'll just have to look for somebody else. And I thought I'd disposed of that. No, back comes another. And this was a very significant answer because it's often stayed with me. And it was simple. You will learn. Please start on Monday. So I had a whole weekend in which to think of my specialty. I mean, some people spend years thinking about their specialties, but mine was a weekend. Well, I got into ophthalmology with fear and trembling. I talk about being dropped in at the deep end. The patients had a rough time. I had a rough time. Mary had a fairly rough time, the baby. But we survived. And then I became interested. And then the doctor who trained me was Dr. Victor Rambo, very famous, lovely Christian ophthalmologist, well known to many people, especially over in the east side of the country. And he trained me in how to do cataract operations and so on. And finally, I was enjoying going out on these village eye camps where we would do literally dozens of cataracts in a day. And one day, as we were just packing up camp, I noticed a little group of people standing over to one side, very much isolated from the rest of the community. And I said to one of the camp helpers, who are they? They've come a bit late. And he said, just as Paul has said, oh, they're just leprosy patients. Meaning, I didn't know, that we don't know anything about why they're there. They've come to an eye camp, but we don't know if there's anything we can do to help them. Or there's somebody else's responsibility. Or, as Paul said, they really don't count. So I said, come on, let's go and see. So we went over and I looked at those eyes and I realized that I hadn't any idea why they were so bad. But I was impressed that although they looked terrible, the patients were not in any obvious pain. And that impressed me. Why weren't they more distressed about it? Well, that began my search, and I just had to find some answers, and I'm still looking for those answers. And it's been a very exciting search, and I'm still looking for them. I still go back to India once every year and try to do some teaching, try to do some more learning.
You're so patient-oriented as you think about, or as you describe these people. You refuse to accept a lesser dignity for them than other people perhaps assign to them.
Right.
And I think that's probably marked your careers, but I'm sure that you remember a number of them by name, or maybe you remember them all by name. Are there some patients that come to your mind, some special stories that were especially meaningful to you?
In one eye camp where we were operating on a young, relatively young woman, and at that camp we had inadequate help. Mostly our medical students would come, but on that occasion they didn't. And we were short of people to do things. So we drafted high school students from the local community. And the little fellow, he said he was 12 years old. He didn't look like it, he was much smaller, but he was very bright. And he was assigned the job of holding the big 3-cell flashlights that we used. That was our light, for our operating room light. And his job was to direct it right onto the eye as I was working. So we found a box for him, and he was put into the correct gown and cap and everything. He felt very important. He felt part of the team, and he was just as cute as they could come. And he did very well. I did 6 cataract operations, and he didn't falter once. He was right on the ball. Then he went to pieces. And I wondered if he was feeling all right. I said, are you feeling okay? And he said, yes, but I don't want to watch this one. She's my mother, pointing to this woman. And so we found somebody to help instead, and he went and sat by his mom when I was through. We did both our eyes in one morning, which we wouldn't do today, but we did, and we got away with it. Well, the day came when we finally took out the stitches, put on glasses. Everybody got the same strength of glasses, which was reasonable for post-cataract. And there he was to help his mom get home. They had a 15-mile walk to get home after the surgery. And he was jumping up and down so excitedly. And she looked around. She knew he was there. And then she fixed on him. And she just said, my son, all these years I thought I knew you. He was 12 years old. Today I see you. And that moment, I think, was, to me, as an ophthalmologist, one of the most heartening. But I'm sure Paul's got other good stories.
Well, we had many patient friends in common. And of course, both of us, in our separate approaches, me with hands and feet, and Margaret with eyes, recognized more and more that the greatest enemy was the loss of pain sensation. And all the loss of hands and feet, all the shrinking away of the fingers, is all due to the fact that these people didn't feel when they hurt themselves. And they would walk on open ulcers on their feet, and they would continue working using all their fingers when one finger was infected and wounded. And that resulted in osteomyelitis and bone infection and the loss of the digits. And the real problem was not so much to discover that this is the way it happened, but to know how to prevent it. And I can remember one of the very first people whom I had worked on really for more than a year to try to get his foot ulcers, healed. And he was a boy called Sadagopan, whom I saw last time I visited India, as pretty much of an old man. He was a young man then. But I can remember him because of the intense patience with which he stuck with me in all my efforts of trying to find the kind of shoe or the kind of footwear or the kind of plaster cast that would finally result in healing that could be sustained, and so that he could walk. His feet were already shrunken to not much more than half their normal size by a succession of, he'd had ulcers for 20 years or so. And finally we had success. And when I was in India a couple of years ago, he came to visit me, and he's married, he has a family. Both his boys have gone into college, and he had a grandchild, all healthy. And he was just so excited to see us again and to greet us, and it was as though we just picked up from where we had left off. And on that visit, we asked him what was the thing that had really changed his life. And I think Margaret can answer that one.
I knew him before Paul knew him. He had come to see Paul. We lived at the college, at the Christian Medical College, out near the campus. And he came out one Saturday afternoon, and I had just been over to the college to take a telephone call. And we met as we came out. He came in a rickshaw. You know what a rickshaw is? Oh, right. A man on a bicycle had been pulling him along. And he got down, and I could see at once that this was a leprosy patient. His feet were bandaged, but I could tell that they were very small. And he walked rather awkwardly to me and said, "I've come to see Dr. Paul Brand." So I said, "Oh, I'm very sorry. He's away for the weekend. Won't be back till Tuesday. If you could just, come back and see him in the clinic on Tuesday morning." And he looked very, very downcast. And then I realized that he probably didn't have anywhere to stay. He said he'd come from Madras. He'd been turned off the bus. He'd given the last bit of money he had. He'd paid the rickshaw driver to bring him. And he had no resources. And it came through so clearly to me, because I'd just been reading that morning, "Blessed are ye, because when I was a stranger, you took me in." And it was as if the Lord was saying, here's your stranger. Well, now, we were still very new into leprosy, and we didn't really know how it was transmitted. We still don't, but we didn't know whether we were susceptible, whether the children were susceptible. I knew that I had to ask that man to come and live in our house until Paul could come back and see him. And so I invited him. And he said to be taken in to somebody else's family. The children were there, and he just felt that he was loved and respected, which he hadn't been able to have for years. And it was just a turning point in his life. So I got to know him before Paul had him as his patient. He was our guest, and it was a great blessing to us.
I was almost ready to throw him out or to throw Margaret out. When I got back from my lecturing in Madras city, I met Margaret on the steps of our bungalow. It had 2 bedrooms and a living room and a kind of veranda which was screened in. And Sadagopan was sleeping in a made-up bed just inside the door. And I looked at him, and Margaret, as you can see how sweet she is, she smiled and said she had to introduce me to a new friend. And it was obvious the moment I saw him that he was an advanced case of leprosy. And he'd walked on his bandages, and they were obviously discharging. And so she introduced me to him. I just said to her, "But Margaret, the children." See, at that time, leprosy was thought to be, and in some ways is, highly contagious, and people are terrified of leprosy. And I was just kind of getting used to the idea of working with these patients and operating on them, being very careful not to, like the way people treat AIDS now, their fear of AIDS. And so I said, "Margaret, what about the children?" "Oh," she said, "the children have been very good. And they've talked to this man, and he's appreciated them, but they've been very careful not to touch him. And it's really been quite a nice time. And besides," she said, "he had nowhere to go." And she just looked straight at me as she said that. And I had the same feeling immediately that she had originally had, but which she was passing on to me, that this was our responsibility and our relationship in our work, that anybody can do an operation, anybody can study a disease or kill bacteria with a chemical or an antibiotic, but to have them in your home was a new relationship, and it was a great experience, and I think that Sadagopan knew that it was a great experience for us as well. He wasn't a fool, and he had become part of our family, and I think that kind of thing, it certainly changed my attitude towards my patients. They had been basically a scientific challenge. Now it is something much more personal.
You just made the comparison to modern days in terms of AIDS. Let's continue with that, not so much about AIDS, but in relationship to the doctor-patient relationship. Because when you describe this, I feel like weeping, listening to you talk about just bringing this man into your home and how much you cared for him. Is that something that needs to be recaptured in modern medicine?
It depends what you're looking for in medicine. I think if people want medicine either to be an expression of their Christian faith and love, or to be a source of their happiness, if medicine is to be a joyful experience, then I think it has to be. We have to get back to it. There's fun in using computers. there's scientific interest in using an MRI scan or a CAT scan, or in being able to study the significance of certain pathology tests, and there's also undoubtedly a satisfaction in making money. There must be. I haven't known too much of it, but people seem to get excited about money. But if you're that excited about money, why not become a banker? And if you're that excited about science, why not go into a research lab? But if you're going to be a physician, and you try to minimize contact with your patient, as so many are doing today, I think you're just cutting off the source of your joy, cutting off the source of your happiness. Because it's that interaction with real people at a gut level where a friend in need is a friend indeed.
Issues for anybody who tries to deliver health care in a Christian way. In his early days, Dr. Paul Brand struggled with apparent contradictions between what his professors were teaching him about biology and what his parents had taught him about a creator God. He shares how he moved beyond keeping these two things separate, that is, separating religion and science, and toward a more reasonable and realistic integration of the two. The result is a more truly holistic and compassionate approach to patients because the Christian doctor sees them as God does, individuals who are highly valued despite the way their own society may view them. Well, in nearly a half century of doing medicine, you've been able to integrate faith in medicine, but I'm wondering if there was some struggle as you learned how to do that, as you tried to do that in your earlier days.
Yes, there was. It is a struggle which I resolved on a temporary basis simply by keeping medicine and religion in two separate parts of my brain. One can do that. I suppose you become schizophrenic in some sense. But the thing that bothered me, I had been brought up in a very, very fundamentalist, evangelical, Bible-believing background. And when I came into medicine and started studying the fundamentals of biology, I was being taught by some of the early pioneers of evolutionary theory. In fact, J.B.S. Haldane was my personal lecturer, one of the great pioneers whose name resounds down the years. H.H. Woolard, who was known in his day as the Monkey Man, because he really, our lecture theatre was surrounded by a long shelf of skulls of primates and apes and chimpanzees and humans, tracing the beautiful sequence of evolution. And I believe that God had created man individually and different animals as species. And how was I, as a student, to deny what my famous teachers were teaching me? And this went on into the scientific aspects of medicine. And I just couldn't handle it. I knew that my faith was real, and I knew, at least it seemed, as if what I was learning was well supported. And so I just had two segments. When I was in the laboratory and studying science and doing research, we had research projects going even at that early stage. And I just kept them separate. And I felt that somehow, if they were both true, there'd be a way to resolve it later. And so that was a struggle. But as time went on, I found that the barrier became less and less significant because there was so much evidence of loving design, that everything was so perfect. And even though in those days people were telling us that the thymus gland was simply a useless organ that had been useful at some previous level of evolution, and the tonsils and the appendix and gill clefts and all sorts of things, every one of which have now been
Correct gown and cap and everything. He felt very important. He felt part of the team, and he was just as cute as they could come.
Of the understanding of DNA has been such a joy and delight to me, because not only does it give us a way to to understand or begin to understand the background of how organs develop and how tissues are formed and how the eye develops and so forth, which is a delight in itself. But it has become a way to analyze statistically and through computers the probabilities of any one thing happening by chance. And now mathematicians, whereas we used to look at shapes, like the shape of the nose or the shape of the forehead or something, and compare a chimpanzee with a human, and it's very hard to quantify what is basically an analog shape. But now that we can digitalize it, because the DNA alphabet of what I call creation, the word of creation, can be analyzed mathematically as to how probable it is that a certain protein will arise from a certain combination. And it has become so obvious that to believe in evolution by chance is a mathematical absurdity. And perhaps in a more positive way, to recognize the exquisite design that, as one sees engineers, qualified engineers, trying to imitate the human hand for a prosthetic hand or for the arm of a satellite, these things are so perfect that I don't believe that it's possible, without a biased approach, to avoid the conclusion that there is design. And to me now, the break is not between creation and evolution, but is the acceptance of design, and beyond that, faith that one knows more about the creator, the designer. And therefore, I really enjoy discussing this with whoever.
This leads into a broader question, perhaps, as we speak about integration of faith and practice. What is a Christian doctor? Perhaps, Dr. Margaret, you have some thoughts about that.
I think the thing that makes the Christian different is the recognition that this is not just a matter of, you're dealing not just with a person's physical problems, their enzymes, their hormones, their anatomical structures. You're not just dealing with the person as far as the psycho factors go, but you have a much more complex person, and that person you've got to relate to, and that person is precious to God, and you see them in a different way. When Paul and I were in China a couple of years ago, and we had a very, very fine interpreter who, after one of the lectures that Paul had given, came to me and said, "You know, I think that Dr. Brand really cares about his patients." And so I looked surprised. I said, "Well, yes, of course he does. They're people, and they matter a great deal to us." Well, we got along in the conversation, and after a little while I shared with him that our daughter had married somebody who'd had leprosy. And we'd been talking about leprosy. I mean, we knew the Chinese attitude to leprosy. Well, this really stunned our interpreter. And he thought he didn't hear correctly, so we repeated it. And after he'd got it from me, he went to Paul, and he tried to get it from him. "Is that really so? Did you really allow your daughter to marry somebody who'd had leprosy?" "Well, yes, no big problem." Paul was surprised at the question. Well, 2 days later he came back and said, "I told my wife about that, and she said it was quite impossible. You must have misheard." So we went through it again. And then he stopped and he said, "Are you people Christians?" I said, "Yes. Are you?" He said, "No, I'm not." But he said, "I have noticed that Christians care for people that nobody else cares about." And I thought, well, that was a beautiful, unsolicited testimonial that Christians care for people and care about people in a way that is different from the average doctor. And I think that's perhaps the only way I can express it.
What do you think is the source, the true source of that kind of caring?
Well, for me, I think it is seeing that person as God sees them. And I've had to learn by some hard experiences to try and do that. And I'm sure I'm not always successful. But I remember on one occasion in India where I thought I knew it all and I had my own ideas of everything. And I was a very important doctor in my own opinion. And there came in one day this young girl, she was in her teens, with 2 children. One a beautiful baby, very healthy, and the other one a very miserable little 2-year-old toddler, clearly desperately malnourished. And his eyelids were swollen tight shut. Now, we were seeing a lot of children coming in with this vitamin A deficiency condition called keratomalacia. And it's a blinding condition. But it's reversible if you can only catch it early enough. And we lay the child down, and this young girl looked at me, watching my face as I struggled, first of all, to get the baby's eyes open. And having done that, realizing that the cornea had totally gone, there was nothing left there, looked at the other eye, that too had already gone. And there was nothing for this child now but blindness. And I turned rather fiercely to the mother. I said, "How long has it been like this?" 7 days. "Well, why did you wait so long? If you'd come earlier, we could have done something for him. But now you've waited too long and you've allowed your child to go blind." And tears were running down her cheeks, and she just said, "I've been 7 days walking here." And I thought, oh, how arrogant I've been, how blind I have been. And suddenly, from what had previously been this young, uncaring mother, I suddenly see this person who's scarcely more than a child herself, struggling 7 days with 2 children to try and feed and keep happy, and hoping she would reach us in time, but she didn't. And the Lord He allowed me that experience. I know, Margaret, can't you just see the way I see these people? Can't you care enough about them that you'll be hurt with their hurts, and you'll really see them in a different way?
When we think about the components of what it means to be a Christian doctor, is how important is the devotion to Christ? And if it is perhaps at the core of importance, how could a medical student, for instance, maintain his or her devotion to Christ during those very difficult training years?
Well, I think there are two aspects of this which are fundamental, and you're talking about a very real problem. Medical school today in America, medical school is a negative influence to Christian faith. I've talked to many communities of medical students, particularly in the Northeast, and again and again when we ask, what is the real difficulty that you face? The difficulty is absolute cynicism on the part of their teachers. They're taught by senior residents while they go through medical school, and when they themselves are residents, they're taught by the teacher. And the very concept of medicine being a vocation, being something that you do with love to patients to bring the love of Christ to them, even if one isn't religious. In the average environment, there are 2 possible objectives. One is to be a great scientist and publish a lot of articles. The other is to make money. And the rest of it is simply the means by which you make your living. And that cynicism is deadening. And in order to live through that with faith, living faith, you need 2 things. One is you need to be in frequent contact with our Lord through the reading of the Word and prayer. And therefore one has to budget time somehow every day to have that relationship kept fresh. And the other is fellowship. The Christian living cell is not designed to function alone. And it's very, very difficult in a thing like that to maintain an active faith all by yourself when everybody else is on a different track. And this is where I think the CMDS can be a wonderful influence. And I believe one of the big responsibilities of CMDS is to know in every segment of the medical colleges around the country where a new student with a fresh, simple, unspoiled faith, where they can find supportive staff, best of all, and supportive students who are entering in the same year or in perhaps a year ahead. And I think that to maintain constant fellowship, frequent meetings, just brief meetings, a little time of prayer, of Bible study, or just exchanging of how things are going, is a wonderful, wonderful strength.
You have sometimes spoken about the crying need that's often expressed to you by students to have role models, to have mentors. And I think that it sounds to me like you're addressing the doctors when you say that, in a sense. You're saying, please look for these students, take them on, be their friends, be their mentors. How should a doctor who would embrace such a calling go about doing such a thing?
Well, I think you can do it through the CMDS, which is an organization dedicated to this kind of relationship. But you need to know the school pretty well to identify people, because a lot of doctors are very busy. I mean, the ones who are teachers are very busy, and they don't feel it necessary to wear their religion on their sleeve. In fact, in many of the environments of today's medical schools, they feel a lot more comfortable being just seen as scientists and not obtruding their faith. And that may be satisfactory for them, but it's far from being a help to students. And it's dramatic, the difference that one single doctor can make to a unit where numbers of students are coming through. In fact, I used to be and still am, a great advocate of missions, medical missions, and I love to have medical students going into medical school with a commitment to becoming missionaries. But today, in the climate that we have in American medical schools today, I find myself frequently, if I'm talking to a bright student who's got a good mind and who's scientifically inclined, I say to them, consider amongst the possibilities of going to Africa or South America or somewhere, consider the possibility of staying in academia, particularly in order to practice your specialty with students around you, where you can be I don't usually use the word role model, where you can help these students to recognize what is important in the way you approach patients or in the way you do your job, whatever it is, the Christian approach. And I think that this is a crying need. Those areas where I know Christian professors, lecturers, unit heads leading up these areas in medical school, it makes a profound difference to the way in which students can go through that school and come up with a strengthened faith and with a real idealism about their future. So here's a great scope, a great opening for doctors who are considering what their future is going to be.
Today, many people in medicine, dentistry, and the allied health fields are discouraged, often because after all their years of training and preparation, all the years of waiting, things haven't turned out the way that they had hoped. Where is the joy? Where is the purpose? Where is the meaning? Is it still possible to find fulfillment in life? What is the true measure of success? In this final segment of our interview, Doctors Paul and Margaret Brand identify the central drive that has impelled their life of service and drives them forward still, even as many of their contemporaries have focused their attention on rest, relaxation, and a life of ease. Many doctors today, as you all know, are discouraged, sometimes even to the point of despair, it seems. Is there, for Christian doctors especially, is there a way to put the joy back into medicine? Would you give us maybe one key?
It's a long... It's interesting that I have been asked this question many times now. In fact, in the last 4 years, I've been asked to speak about this to major surgical and medical societies, Surgical College of Surgeons in New York State and others. And one of them, I think it was that particular one, the president, in asking me to give an address to the chapter, said, tell some of the doctors who are so discouraged they're thinking of giving up medicine, tell them how to bring the joy back into medical practice. This is a thing people are conscious of. And I think I've already addressed this when we were talking from another starting point. But I believe that the joy of medicine comes from the personal interaction with people. Seeing a person who may have come into the room afraid for their own self, afraid of you, because you're the great high and mighty, and afraid that you may produce some sentence which is to them a death sentence or a sentence of other sort. To see that fear giving way to trust, and then to see them accepting from you advice which takes account of their problems and their weaknesses and their fears, and that they go away with confidence. They go away with a prescription too, but that prescription isn't fun. That prescription isn't joy, and nor is the computer joy that worked out some of the details of technical stuff for you and brought things back to your memory. The joy is in the level of person to person, and I believe that people have simply got to get back that joy. And the interesting thing is that whatever joy one gets from the technical aspects of medicine are only the joys of success, whereas the joy of personal interaction is there in success and in what we call failure. And some of the people who, like Dame Cicely Saunders in England, who started the hospice movement, and with whom I've really enjoyed some discussions in that institution. It's amazing to see the amount of joy in that Christian institution for the dying, where every single patient you have is terminal, and you know that all you can do is to help them through what is going to be medically a failure, but to see the way in which you are where the doctors are appreciated and the nurses are appreciated, and the patients come to life spiritually and mentally, even while their body is going to pieces. I think this is exciting, and it's the kind of joy that isn't dependent upon physical outcome.
You mentioned the word success, which is also another major concern for physicians worldwide. I expect that both of you have some thoughts about what real success is. Dr. Margaret, would you answer that first, and then perhaps Dr. Paul would like to do so.
Yes, I think I've had to learn some lessons about this. As Paul was speaking, I was thinking too that one of the perks of being a doctor is, he said that you're the great big person now. You are God, as it were, and people get a lot of satisfaction out of that. To them, that is success, when their image is right up there. But I had an experience recently when I was back at Carville, and it's a bit of a long story. I'll try and shorten it. But I had a patient who, like many patients who have Hansen's disease or leprosy, had lost her eyelashes and her eyebrows. And she felt very self-conscious about this. So she decided she would paint in her eyelashes. It wasn't so difficult about the eyebrows, but painting in the eyelashes was tricky because her hands were not steady, her vision was not good, and she had armed herself with a brush and some kind of industrial strength eyeliner, and she was going to make a real good impression that she really did have eyelashes there. But in doing so, she kept jabbing her cornea with this brush, which was loaded with the eyeliner. And after a few days, the eyes began to get a bit red and weepy, and she came to the clinic, and I could see what she'd been doing. And this wasn't the first time. And I was always remonstrating with her.
Because she couldn't feel pain.
No, that was it. She couldn't feel pain. She would have stopped at once, or she would have come immediately. She'd have been in terrible pain if she had normal corneal sensation. But the disease had robbed her of this precious guardian of her sight. And so one day I said to her, Eva, if you go on doing this, you could get a bad corneal ulcer and you might lose the eye, you might go blind. And I thought, well, surely that's a very strong message. But no, again, because she didn't feel pain, blindness was kind of a rather abstruse concept. She didn't really get it. And she just said to me, Doctor, you don't understand. It's more important to me how the world sees me, including her eyelids, than how I see the world. Well, I was horrified that she had those kind of priorities. And then the Lord touched me and he said, what about yourself? What about your image? Aren't you always hoping that you're making a good impression on people, getting the satisfaction of feeling people saying, oh, she's such a wonderful doctor? Or are you really concerned to be seeing the people I see in the way I see them and love them as I love them? Then you'll find real joy. And as for success, you won't worry about it anymore because you'll found something even better.
I think one could ask the question, was Jesus a success? God had a problem with the people of Israel. He'd given them the law in the Mount Sinai, which is a tremendously powerful volcano, and the earth was shaking with earthquakes, and God was known to be the God who took them out of Egypt and fought their battles with them, and the Israelites thought of him as somebody great and high and holy and wonderful, almost as high as a doctor. And I think that God recognized the fact that whereas the people regarded him with awe and wonder and fear, they didn't love him. And God wanted fellowship and love. I think it brought him joy. And so he came in Jesus Christ. And in Jesus Christ, he came as a servant to experience things with the patients, with his people, and to suffer with them. And when they hurt, he hurt. And I think the response is love. And Jesus, I think, was a success, even though he died on the cross, of course, because he died on the cross. But I believe that Christian doctors need to think of that. Do we want to have a different kind of ideal, a so-called higher ideal, in quotes, than that of our Lord? And then we shall experience his joy, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame.
Well, most people, when they think about success, most physicians perhaps, think about their CV or articles they've published or whatever it may be. And you both have had numerous significant achievements. You've been recognized for different things that you've published and so forth. What do you view then, in light of what you just shared, as your most significant achievement in life so far?
That's a tough one. I don't know. I think I'm prepared to leave it to the Judgment Day. But of the various medals and plaques that we've had, I think the one I like best is the one that I received a few years ago from the CMDS, the Christian Medical Dental Society, and they gave me an earthenware bowl with a towel hanging out of it, and they called me the servant of the year, I think, or the servant of whatever it was. That I was very happy that somebody picked on that. It's a good one.
People that reach their 80s often take things more easily take it easier in life than you do. They want to retire and enjoy their final few days or whatever, years or whatever it may be. But you are still writing, you're traveling, you're trying to instill these qualities and truths in people. What is it that drives you to do that?
I can only say it's the Lord. You know, we used to sing that hymn, I need thee every hour. But I find myself saying, I need thee every 5 minutes. And I think that the more you spend time with him, the more exciting it gets. It's not that we have to push ourselves to do these things. It's that we can't stop, because the Lord just seems to be in it and giving us enthusiasm. And I don't know any other explanation. Have you got something?
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think that it's I really tried this last year to slow down, because I'm not as good as I used to be, and my memory gives up in the middle of a sentence. But I say, well, it's going to be a sabbatical year now. I'm not going to go traveling or speaking much. But that's miserable. When people that you love and people who love the Lord seem to need help and seem to feel that you can give it and inspiration, just to be an active channel of the love of God and of the inspiration. I mean, after all, the Spirit is the thing. The Spirit is the breath. The Spirit is the source of the power, and just to feel that He can flow through you is exciting. It's exciting, and it's the same. It's the same with, you were talking a little while ago about marriage. The same is there, that people don't seem to be concerned to undertake discipline in order that they may win a race, a physical race. If they want to come first in the 1,000 meters or the mile, whatever it is, they will exercise and they'll practice and they'll subject themselves to stern discipline, pain even, to achieve that. And I think that the joy of the Lord and the joy of 50 years or more of marriage, these are all ecstasies which are comparable to the crown of laurels of the Olympic Games or the gold medal of the laurel, and yet people don't seem to be prepared to discipline themselves in the struggle to get to that position where there is so much joy. And it's not, the law of the Lord is not a restriction, it is a path to freedom. Just as physical exercise, physical discipline, where you go over and over again, weightlifting or throwing the shot put or whatever it is that you do it again and again and again till it hurts, knowing that you're going to enjoy the fruits of it in your own self. It isn't just the tangible prize, it's that you yourself are stronger and better and more agile and healthier and all the rest, and so you do it. But when it comes to the moral law, which has greater joys and greater rewards at the end of a marriage life, or at the end of a life of service to the Lord, people feel that somehow you're restricting them by suggesting that they undergo discipline. It's absolutely wrong.
I had one other question I want to be sure we answer. That is, how do you want to be remembered?
I think I'm content to leave it to posterity. But I think I'd like a bowl on my headstone with a towel, and perhaps an ulcerated foot being ministered to Another thing, we talked about joy, and one of the things that so has impressed me, when I went into medicine as a young man, the thing that as I told you, that so turned me off from the idea was pus, and abscesses and infections and things of this sort, and smelly feet. But if somebody really wants to give me joy today, give me a good smelly foot with an ulcer and pus, maybe in a diabetic or a leprosy patient, and it is pure joy. I really love feet and ministering to them, and I think it is symbolic of the fact that the Lord not only gives us the strength to do things, but makes them fun to do.
Mm-hmm. Margaret, is there a way that you wish to be remembered?
No, I would like to think that I could be remembered as having done a good job as a mother, and that I've just been available to the Lord here and there, whatever. I've often said that when we went to India, I speak for the many other wives, we were the stopgappers. The husbands would have the appointments, the jobs. The wives would fill whatever gaps there were. And as a profession, I have tried to fill a gap. And I'd like to think that the Lord has used me in that way to help fill gaps in people's lives and to keep the family. Mostly, I'd like to be remembered as Paul's wife.
Thank you so much for giving us this day. God bless you.
Thank you, Dave. It's been very helpful to talk about these things.
The Christian Medical and Dental Society is an organization of physicians, dentists, medical and dental students, and allied health professionals. Founded more than 60 years ago as a ministry primarily to students, we have developed multiple ministries since then, all focused on equipping and motivating doctors to practice their faith in Jesus Christ in their personal and professional lives. We have field staff in various regions of the country and a national office which provides support for our more than 8,000 members and friends. We publish a journal, study guides, and other resources, including ethics statements. We sponsor regional and national conferences on a variety of topics in the interface of medicine and faith. We have special ministries to singles and to women in medicine and dentistry. We are involved in medical and dental missions, both domestic and foreign, and offer continuing medical education for missionaries. We offer marriage growth conferences and family conferences designed to address the special needs of doctors and their families. We look forward to hearing from you and to working with you for the cause of the great physician through the healing professions.